Thank you, Peter, and thank you for having me here today. I didn't set out to be a disruptor. I have been in education for over 20 years and in education management, and somewhere along my journey I suddenly went, this doesn't make sense. And so I took a very common sense approach to the problem I saw in front of me. And actually I looked into industry, and my entire education career had been always interfaced with the industry, of various industries, and I looked at what changes they were going through. And of course, if you look across most sectors, the disruption has already happened. Education is almost the last frontier that hasn't had mass change happen. And so even if you look at just a couple of isolated incidents, and I'll talk about two that happened this year. Tesla, an electric car company, sold 180,000 cars online in 24 hours. The year before in the US, there were 16,000 sales. Why? Because they provided something different. Pokemon Go, I have to say it, 24 hours after it launched, there was no marketing, there was no way anyone would know apart from providing something different. 100 million people signed up, who most of all were of the university student age. Why? Because it provided something different. So we cannot sit back and just think because we don't see the change happening that it won't happen, because it is already occurring. And if we sit back for too long, the worse off we are going to be when the change occurs. So typically this is the argument I hear, and I work with universities and higher education and K1 through 12 across the world. They say it's too big. The ship cannot be turned. There is too much complexity, there are too many regulations, there's too much compliance, and so we'll just kind of sit back and wait. And the other one I get is, look, my career's over in 5 or 10 years, I'm going to wait it out. But unfortunately, through that period of time, we've got a whole generation of students who are going to live through this transitional period. And that's what got me restless. And so we can talk about where the future goes in a forward futuristic way and say this is just one form of, this is a little tiny robot that they're talking about being able to embed into your brain, and actually in the future you won't need to have anything because basically you have Google inside your brain. And so you won't need education at all because it will all be immediately there for you. But I don't think we should wait for this. And I don't think that we should wait even a single week before we start thinking about the next generation of children. And Peter was talking about digital natives, and I hear this term a lot. And I can tell you right now, digital natives, to me, are a group that you haven't seen yet if you're in higher education. They were children born after 2004, when they had a smartphone in their pocket, they had Wi-Fi at home, they were in immersive classrooms, they were doing problem-based learning, they were doing flexible flipped classrooms. These kids coming through who are 12 and under are going to scare the hell out of you if you are in higher education, because they don't know a traditional class at all. So for me, the challenge was there. It was game on for me. It was like, what do I do to change the world of education in my little place in New Zealand? So first I had to leave higher education. I got out. And then I looked at the industry and said, you know what, I'm going to hack education. And actually this term, if you know, it's used for a lot of, we talk about hackathons, we talk about various things in coding and technical, but I went out and said to the public, tell me about what education should look like. Tell me about what you think education does right now that's maybe not working, and what do you think it might do in the future if it did work. And I crowdsourced this information. So I went out to teachers, to academics, to faculty, to parents, to grandparents, to children, and we put this online and we got the information back. And so through this process, I was able to launch the Mind Lab. And the Mind Lab set up to do one thing, is to say, how about as a school, you come into our facility and we'll show you how you can learn a different way, without a textbook, without a data projector, without a smart board, but actually just with problems that you need to solve. And we looked at science and technology. We looked at coding and robotics and 3D printing. We looked at all sorts of interesting ways to teach, and we invited the schools in. It was a social enterprise with one site, and I was thinking, great, I'm going to do my little piece of good work here, provide this facility. What we didn't expect was the demand. That schools all over the country were saying, hey, what about us? We want to teach this way too. We understand these kids do not need to have content-based knowledge put into their brains. They need the ability to problem solve, find good information, authenticate its valuable information, know how to apply it. How do I collaborate? How do I find others like me globally? And so we grew. So in the first year, we had 4 locations. We set up these physical labs, and they were beautiful labs, and they didn't look like schools. And when we had these classes of kids coming through, we'd say, welcome to our school, and they'd look and laugh and say, you're not a school. And I'd say, why are we not a school? And they said, you don't look like one. This looks like fun. And we'd tell them things like, when you come in, if you open your mouth too long, a robot will fly in, so you have to be really quiet sometimes. And so we started trying to think about ways you can engage kids and tell stories and have them really excited about their learning. And so we went from 4 locations. We now teach 40,000 school children every year. And actually on top of that, these kids are not just sitting back in their classroom, they're physically getting on buses and coming to us in these locations because the hunger for a different way of engagement is so strong. Not just from the students, but from their teachers and their principals of the schools and the communities. And so as these children are learning, they're thinking about a different world and new opportunities. So going back to Sydney, and we're here in the Herald last year, local Herald, they've said, digital disruption in academia, are we ready for Uberversities? And they talked about this idea that perhaps disruption is happening. And so back then in September last year, they said in maybe 10 years, we will see this change. And I have a counter view. There is not a 10-year window before this change is going to happen. We're living in exponential times. We're living in a period of rapid change, and I'm going to talk about how that's going to impact you. But then I realised it's all very well to teach children. You know, I love that. Every day I get to see these most excited young people. But their teachers were saying, well, hang on, what about us? How do we get on this same wave, and how do we understand how to teach differently? So I partnered with New Zealand's largest public technical institute, Unitec. They're a traditional institute, government funded, and we went into a public-private partnership. Now, Unitec were also extraordinary. They're an applied practice environment, but they themselves are going through a change, and they've seen the writing on the wall. They're going from 55 hectares of land currently down to 8, without reducing student numbers. They are going from 150,000 square metres of buildings to 50,000. So they have seen the future is not about bricks and mortar, it's about utilisation in different ways. It's about community spaces, it's about bringing people together, and it's about putting things online. So they were already in the space of progressive. So we partnered, and we suddenly went, let's go and take this to the teaching world. So we launched a postgraduate program in digital and collaboration. Now, teachers we did know have no free time. They're working hard every day in front of a classroom, so we couldn't teach them during the day. No one was going to pay for a reliever for them to go and study. So we had to develop a postgraduate environment that was taught after hours, that was taught in the weekends, that we could get face-to-face with them. We had to find faculty who understood that they were not going to have a 9-to-5 job or a 9-to-3 or long summer holidays. We set up a program of 32 weeks part-time for the postgrad program, and we scaled it. But what we did is we broke rules. We said to teachers, it's okay to fail, to not understand this, to feel really unconfident about the way you're learning, because that's what your students face every day. It feels great when you suddenly go, I don't get this, I don't understand this, and I need to figure it out. And we started to see the light go back on, and the passion come back in for teaching when they realised this is exciting times, this is exciting stuff. And so we went out across the country. And we thought about how we would scale this program, because we couldn't keep building facilities. The cost of bricks and mortar facilities was just not going to be able to be scaled, particularly as a social enterprise. So in July 2015, we had 4 locations. We were teaching 800 teachers across 4 locations. Now, 800 postgraduate students is a pretty big goal and a pretty good achievement in a very short time. But then we realised we had to go bigger. So as of now, 2 years after we launched, we now have the 4 physical labs. We have 12 satellite labs, 4 more opening in 12 weeks' time. We have teachers right across the country going in, and we're not using our facilities, we're using the facilities of other education facilities and faculties. So we're still teaching 4 hours a week face-to-face. We've built this incredible bespoke online platform to connect everyone, and we now have 1,350 teachers on top of the 800 we had last year. So 631 schools have got teachers on our program. We're delivering 68 hours a week of classes to these teachers. And by the end of this year, 1 in every 30 teachers in the country will have gone through this digital and collaborative program. And we kicked off 2 years ago. We also brought in video-based assessments, which gave our New Zealand Qualification Authority heart failure initially, the idea that you could do postgrad and present back, instead of in a thesis or in a report or in a paper, actually a video of applied practice from their classroom. And that was extraordinarily positive and really loved, because it made teachers think about and reflect on how they were teaching. Because actually when they did that video, then they had to share it back with their cohort, which would typically be another 350 teachers from across the country. So we changed the form of assessment. And we really empowered these teachers to feel great about going back to school. But actually what I want to talk about mostly today is why we're doing this, and the fact that the way we're teaching children, the way we teach our teachers is exactly the same. The idea is education is there to make people ask questions. It is not about providing answers. We have to make sure right across the education system we're not just giving them information to retain to pass the exam. Education should be active. The idea that if you're involved with your learning, you're retaining that information and you're able to repurpose it. We also believe that you have to be able to understand the process of failing and fixing. We do it every day naturally. We fail, we figure out another solution, we find someone who can help us, but actually encouraging a student of any age to do that is quite a foreign concept. So you have to teach them the benefit of failure and fixing. And then iteration. The idea that the first time it may not work. You may have to go back and reconstruct it, redo it, create it again, find another expert. And the other thing is this collaboration, because we now know in every report from the likes of the World Economic Forum, or if you're talking to the World Bank or anyone you're talking to, will tell you that collaboration is the #1 trait that people want within a company. People who can work well with others. And most important, we need to make sure that we continue to discover. If we're teaching the material that we knew we could teach 3 or 4 years ago, and sometimes 10 or 20 years ago, there is no discovery. Make sure we're making every opportunity for kids to discover. And why this goes on, and this was in the paper 2 days ago, talking about that universities are making some students feel like failures. We are putting so many students through the system. And the system, this whole career utopia, is a fallacy, that we're not providing students with pathways to great success. We've just changed the benchmark as a degree has suddenly become the new norm. And the system is not going to provide the jobs of the future that we now know we need, given that between 40 and 50% of all jobs are going to become redundant in the next 10 to 15 years. If you look at the likes of the World Economic Forum and talking about education, what they're saying is we cannot weather this process, the current technological revolution, by waiting for the next generation. And this is the terminology I hear. I'll just write it out. We're responsible today. If you're an educator, if you're leading a team, we are responsible for the success of our children. We can't sit back and say it's up to them to change when they get there. And so if you look at companies, and this is where I always sit, I look at companies and say, what are they doing? How can they do it? How can large organisations with 20, 30, 40,000 staff, how can they move? much more rapidly than some of these institutes. They are constantly investing in capabilities and new product development. How often I work with universities here, New Zealand, around the world, and I say, what new products are you developing? Are you doing dual degrees? Are you doing shorter programs? Are you doing international programs? Are you looking at the actual subject materials? There's very little change year on year. We need to think about technology and cybersecurity. We need to start looking with expansion, but we should look towards industry to understand what are their drivers and how can we apply them. I also want to talk here about the companies that succeed. What do they do differently than companies that don't succeed or are not so successful? First of all, they expect technology will have a bigger impact on their growth. They plan for that. They also focus on fostering innovation. These companies are out there driving this, but they're also looking at innovation embedded in their business. So again, if we take it into an education model, these are the very things we should be doing within our institutes. So the disruptions are here, and we can't avoid them. They're not going to go away. And they look in different ways. And I live my world with Tech Futures Lab, which is for professionals, another part of the education system I'm involved in, which is around things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and data science and automation and robotics. This is the new world. But while we sit back, education is changing in other ways. At the moment, Google, Facebook and Microsoft are all working with the top 50 universities in the world. And they are saying, give us your flagship undergrad programs. We will take them, we'll repurpose them, we won't make them like a Coursera with just talking heads. We'll make them truly collaborative for young students coming through, but we'll make them free. And they'll still be stamped by those great universities. And each cohort is expected to have over 10 million students. And the university will get to handpick the very best for postgraduate studies and keep their reputation and put some really interesting time into research. But the undergrad level will become a very low-cost delivery platform. It's already happening. A good example here is Microsoft. They identified there's 1.5 million jobs in data science. They can't find people, so they've just launched their professional degrees. Again, a free degree. This one is certified by Microsoft. If you want a job and you're a young person, you're interested in data science, there is going to be no better opportunity for you than to do this degree with a company who's saying, we will hire you. The models are quickly changing. And actually, when they're going out and stating these, they're talking about relevancy. We want these companies. Google are doing it with the same thing in Facebook with their Open Academy. It's saying we will take these students, we'll put them through our programs with your certification and put them back into the marketplace. Those who want jobs go to jobs, and those who want to study at higher education can go back to the institutes. We cannot ignore these changes. But what I want to overlay this with, and this is the bit that's most exciting for me, is that we have a global connectivity issue right now. 7.5 billion people and less than 4 billion people have reliable, fast internet. And that is going to change in the next 12 to 24 months. There are currently 12 global organizations who all claim within 12 months that they will have free internet for all. If not free, fast and cheap. And actually, that is going to change everything, because suddenly at the same time that we have global connectivity and phones in our pockets, the growth is going to be close to 8 billion people very soon who have full access to the internet. A good example here is, this is a drone with Facebook bringing in internet to rural locations. Google have Loom project with balloons. Microsoft have white space technology. Qualcomm are using satellites. One after the other, they're all bringing new technologies to the world. So what does that mean? Because these kids, if you go out to these developing countries, have technology. They have it in their pockets, they have tablets, they have smartphones. In some of these developing countries, they have more smartphones per person than in developed nations. What they're missing is that connectivity to give them the ability to self-educate, and this is going to happen. We also have a massively growing global population. So when we were all out celebrating in 1999, another 1 billion people had been born. We're growing rapidly. So by 2020, let's be conservative. Let's not go next year or the year after. Let's be really conservative. Go 2020. In 3 years' time, 4 billion more people online. 4 billion more students, 4 billion more people trying to figure out how to become educated without access to universities. 4 billion more people who are going to figure out an alternative education model that works for them, because at the same time the middle class is rising. We are going to experience the greatest period of innovation ever. And we only need to look back the last 10 years since we, in the Western world, got fast internet connectivity. What happened? Our invention and our innovation grew, our entrepreneurship grew, we changed everything in the last 10 years. Before that, the internet was too slow. They don't have that clunky dial-up phase to go through. They've got the device in their pocket. We're not looking at the issue there, we're looking at access. Access will come, and they will find a new way of educating. So by 2030, in 13 years' time, 60% of the world's population is going to be middle class, up from 27% just a few years ago. 60% of the world's population middle class. And 80% of the global middle class will be in developing regions. These students are going to create education models that work for them because they don't have access to traditional education, and they will create a new model because they can, because they're looking for something new, and they will become the dominant way of educating because the populace part of the young people will be doing something differently. I also want to talk about, just in terms of the number of these people, in India alone, 1 million young people in India will enter the labour force every month for the next 20 years. 1 million a month. Tell me that they are not going to change education. They know the golden ticket to the Western world is education. They know the subjects to take, they understand STEM, but they don't have access to traditional markets. They will redevelop and innovate education. We also need to look at things like the future of jobs at the World Economic Forum. The reason we don't change is we just don't have enough information at our fingertips. It's insufficient understanding of some of these mass disruptions. And we also have resource constraints. We're not rewarding people to innovate. We're saying mostly if it's a company, it's the shareholder return. If it's a university, it's steady as you go in its rankings. These are not the nurturing place of change. So we also need to make sure that we are bringing in incentives to get our staff to be progressive and rewarding them for trying something new. In terms of the technologies that are rapidly changing, mobile internet cloud technology is going to be the biggest changes for education, followed by big data. It's the same as within industry. We're very quickly changing the way we can understand business and how we understand education, whether it works. So at the end, I just want to summarize, roll up some of these things here. So what are the consequences of these changes? First of all, a middle class growing, rising incomes, people understand to stay in that middle class sector they need to be educated, and they'll need to find a way to self-educate because the sheer volume of these people coming through. We're going towards 10 billion people by 2050. So we're also going to need to look at new education products that compete with the ones that are coming out of these developing countries. Because if you say you have to come to a physical facility and pay huge fees, they just won't be here. We need to be increasingly connected. We need to be able to provide communities. We need to bring globalization and links to the rest of the world. And we also need to disseminate information differently. A lecture is not going to be the way of the future. We have to find other ways to spread information. Here in Australia, you have this report, this new work order report, and the stats are very ugly. They're no different, I have to say, in New Zealand. We just don't have this great report. But 1 in 3 young Australians are unemployed or underemployed. 1 in 3. You know, we're seeing that the workforce, they're actually going into study in areas that are going to be automated. And if you look more into the report, they're saying that actually in this here, we've got about 50 to 60% of all areas they're studying are not going to be around in the future. So these are known changes coming, and we still are teaching young people for these jobs. This report's available online too if you just Google it. So we do have some really big challenges ahead, and we do need to mobilise change. We need to find leaders who can work through this and take on the big arguments, and it's a tough gig. It's hard to mobilise people who don't want to shift, but actually our responsibility is to this generation for our future here in Australia and certainly in New Zealand where I am. And just want to talk about very end what else I'm doing, just to see I don't sit still either. You know, I realise that the market, we can educate children. I can change the way that the teachers teach those children so they get more engaged and they have higher achievement. But we also have to work with companies. So Tech Futures Lab, my other business, we take professionals mid-career, because the age between 30 and 55 are the most at risk in the future. We're taking those people and we're taking a year's worth of university study and putting it into a 10-week program. And these programs are things like business disruption and automation, AI. And the accreditation is not, for the first time for me, by the New Zealand Qualification Authority, but by industry who have partnered with us. The 7 largest New Zealand companies, plus the likes of IBM and Microsoft. And actually, the qualification themselves are sitting on the blockchain. And for those who don't know that, it's a distributed ledger that cannot be, it's an authentication process used in the financial systems, but we're actually saying, let's put the qualification there as well. So we have to stay light on our feet, we have to keep moving forward, but we have to start. Thank you.